Welcome to Conscious Insights, Strategies for Leadership Evolution. Engage in roundtable discussions that spark deep dialogue with executives and thought leaders to advance conscious leadership and explore innovative practices. Join us and gain insights that will elevate your leadership journey. Hi there, and welcome back to our part 2 of the future of flourishing, finding order in a disordered world. I'm bringing back Cecily Sommers in a very timely fashion from our last episode, which I'll talk about in a moment. And our friend Ashish that joined us, he just could not be here today and agreed that we needed to get this out pretty timely. So our last episode, we had a fascinating conversation with you, Cecily, about, you're a futurist, you're a change person. I am a futurist. I'm not a futurist. I want to be a futurist. I'm going to lead like a futurist. I am a change person. I'm a strategist as well as working with individual leaders. And what we talked about last time is, when we'll revisit a little bit, is the 80 to 100-year cycle of change that has a pattern in societies. We talked about order, disorder, and reorder, and that we're in a disordered cycle right now, and about exploration and emergence. And we only talked about one. We talked about how the future is not figureoutable, but it is followable. And we only talked about one area, a very important area, about how the things we need to do within ourselves to be resourced to make it through a time like this. However, Cecily and I are in very much agreement that, like I say, evolved leaders create evolved systems. These are tied together. It's not just what we do in our inner state. It is also, there are things in the outer state. And that's why we want to have this second conversation timely. We want to be able to talk through that using some of Cecily's just some great approaches, and about what, change literacy. What is it, and what tools can we provide you as leaders and organizations to move through this time? So, Cecily, welcome back. Thank you so much. And if we, kind of talk about where we left off, and some of the things I just summarized, would you want to just summarize a couple of things and then transition us into, what do you mean when you say the future is not figureoutable, but it is followable?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for continuing this conversation. We are trying to navigate a new environment. And one of the things that I know from doing my work now for 25 years with organizations and with leaders is that leaders and futurists kind of stand in the same position, which is on that edge of the future. And, in the work that I've done on the future of leadership, in fact, and in developing curricula around that, is that it turns out that what leaders need most now is kind of sitting in the palm of my hand, that it's the very principles and practices of foresight that leaders need also. And ideally are then scaling it in what I call change literacy for the organization. So here's what I mean by that. We're going to talk at a few different levels. One is that, what are those foresight principles? They are that when we take what I call the futurist perspective, we go way out, we zoom out to see how things work and what the relationships are.
So we're like on the balcony, we're looking down, we're observers. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Kind of. But further out. So I love that you said that, because when we get perspective on something, there are different layers of perspective. So this is used in management often, of kind of moving off the dance floor and into the balcony so you can kind of see the action that's going on. And I find that that is fantastic for kind of relational aspects.
Yeah.
We then also talk about taking a 30,000-foot view, which is what we get literally when we fly in an airplane. And we look out the window and we go, oh, there are patterns in the land, as we see rivers cutting through and becoming lakes, and plains becoming mountains, and mountains, and turning into desert and going out to the sea, that there are patterns of movement and change through a landscape. That's the 30,000 foot view. And that's often kind of industry look, right? So we're going from what are the politics and mechanics when we get to the balcony view. When we get to 30,000 foot view, we're kind of getting what are the markets and industry doing. A futurist view is really more that cosmic view of what are the key principles that run through all living systems.
Yeah, like the thread.
It's the thread.
Yeah.
So, often we look to science, or I do anyway, to understand, to kind of cut through it all, to go, how does it really work? And when we do go out to take the universal view, because especially in times of great change, we want to hook our strategy to the things that don't change.
Right. Kind of like, to ground this for other people, what your core values are, or if you're in an organization, what's the vision and mission we're working towards. But we're talking at a much bigger level of what can ground us. Would that be
Well,
a
I'm very
fair?
clear about the things that don't
Yeah.
change,
Yeah.
that are, to me, are the variables in any strategy that make strategy strategic, by the way. Um, and the things that don't change that we want to always kind of follow is number one, as an organization, but even as people, we want to be clear about who we're serving. What are we here to do?
Hmm.
And what is that core need? Because one of the things that doesn't change is human nature.
Yeah.
Values are an expression of that. Trends are an expression of that. Culture and current issues are an expression of what we care about now, given kind of changing context. So context changes, but the core need does not.
Okay. Yeah.
So we focus on human nature. We also focus on what is our purpose. As far as
Hmm.
I'm concerned, strategy, the compass for pointing into the future is really always, what's your purpose? This is how you determine the territory you're headed to and how to identify it and claim it. And it doesn't change either. It's sacred.
Absolutely. Unless it's time for it to change.
No, it shouldn't. And it
Yeah.
doesn't. I
Yeah.
actually, no. So purpose does not change. A vision might, how you articulate it as a mission might, but purpose does not change.
Yeah.
Brand expression of it might. But in fact, if you're paying attention, each one of us and every organization and every system has a wiring that has its expression, and it is designed to do something very specific. So when I do purpose work,
Yeah.
we're really wanting to pull that forward because it's like reading the genetic code.
Let me make sure that I'm understanding and kind of put it in my words too. When I'm actually working with an organization right now on, mission, vision, and guiding principles. And we're just saying, like, make sure as we ask people questions that people understand what that means, because it could mean something. And so metaphorically, those are the riverbanks. That's how we're using it. Those are the riverbanks that keep us moving forward when the river, Everett, a lot of things in the river is changing, but those riverbanks ensure it doesn't flood and that keeps moving forward. And the purpose, I guess I would think, I would call it like the rocks that ground it always. So that is another way of looking at it. But keep going. I just wanted
Yeah,
to.
yeah. Purpose is the life
Yeah,
force, really. It's the
yeah,
life
yeah.
force, when we go back into that cosmic view again,
I love that, the life force.
it is the life force. So to again borrow from what physics teaches us, and we go back to the Big Bang, which tells us about change, and it also
Yeah,
tells us about purpose, in fact, is that, we can borrow from 13.8 billion years ago when the Big Bang, which is, again, when change comes, it's like these pressurized forces coming towards one another, but pushing against each other at the same time. And we
yeah,
get conflict and polarization and combustion.
yeah.
And then comes a creative burst, which is an explosion. Right. And so these are the cycles of change that carry these energies. And that is the phase of disorder that we're in now. But from that explosion, as we know, and it's not just a poetic metaphor, all of that stardust, the stars explode, fall into creating a planet that gives life.
Hmm.
And so every life form is created as kind of a unique package of stardust.
Yeah.
And each one of us comes in a package that is designed to live like this is what we were born to do. And that's what I call purpose.
And let me just make sure we're talking
Yeah.
an individual, an organization, a society, the earth, like all of those things carry this common thing within them.
They
Yeah.
They do. And so we're looking to the uniqueness of that. And in an organization, usually it's in the founding. Some people, they see we are here to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, make money, make an impact, but that's kind of the consequence of operating out of an initial life spark that says what we're about is this.
Yeah.
And it's really not changeable, right? People layer on different, epochs within an organization and give it new language, but you always find there's a life force in the culture of an organization that is just constant.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm talking about. And when you really know what that is, you can steward it well. And so I'm a fan of that. So what doesn't change in the equation of strategy are human needs, your purpose, and then also the nature of change itself. So we've talked about that the biggest cycle that we're talking about is kind of the spiral nature. Everything occurs in cycles, and yet every life force, including organizations and people and societies, does it. And they're linked cycles that get a little bit larger. This is the path of evolutionary change. So that they expand until they die out in some manner. So that's one of the ways that we read change is where are we in that turn of the spiral? And again, one of the easiest handles that we discussed in our earlier conversation is every life cycle, and that can be inside of a year in the 4 quarters, or in the age of a project, or in a phase of business development. Where are we where certain things are expiring and other things are emerging? And
Right.
so I find in working with teams, when we get everybody speaking spiralese and identifying and watching what's emerging and expiring, that is really helpful. That's kind of the core level of change literacy. And then there is a deeper level of societal change that also follows 4 predictable forces.
And as you
Yeah.
say that, this is what we really want people. We want people to hear all this, but this is something really pivotal because there is fear right now. There is real threats, like we had talked about earlier. There is real change, and so this is beyond just grounding ourselves. So, what you're about to say is really important for people to hear.
Yeah, it is. And so change literacy is number one. Can we follow where we are in these cycles? And because of the speed and kind of transformative nature of where we are in this period of disorder, it's really important that we're engaging with continuous reinvention and to do that through the change literacy of the 4 forces. So one is the spiral. Number 2 is how societies are structured. So similar to the future is not figureoutable, like we can't just stand back and actually cast an outcome that we want. It is only followable. So we want to learn what to follow and how to follow it. And that is to follow the patterns of change. And as we do so, build what I refer to as the other AI, anticipatory intelligence.
Mm.
And the 4 forces help us to do that. The 4 forces are what I have named as the 4 elements of a society. And they are first resources. So every group that comes together to become stronger together is first looking to sustain life from the natural resources that are around them.
Mm-hmm.
So that is primary. and they move in this order. And that's where we see that there are changes in energy or land, water, drought, floods, hurricanes, climate change. What are the new resources under the sea or up into the asteroids, or what we might be mining on Mars or the moon. So those are all resources and in the resource force field.
Yeah. Okay. We can even think about that over time of how resources available to humans have changed. But I want you to keep going, because
well, what we know is that when resources change, typically people move.
Yeah.
Right. So, this is why when we have shift in resources, we see more migration. We have climate refugees and conflict refugees and, financial refugees. People are moving, and that creates some pressure in the system.
Right. Yeah.
Which I'll get to. The second force is technology. One of the things that humans are great at is creating tools that initially are done to harvest those resources that we have to take care of ourselves, and also to make things more productive, and to make them more convenient and easy and secure and safe, and that can sustain, like build shelters and make food and, be able to store food and all the things that we've invented through the years.
Yeah.
And it's why when technology changes, that the economy does too, because it shifts our means of production and distribution. So we can see that a lot of the trends we're watching in the resource force field are driving a lot of change and current issues. We can see that technology is also driving a lot of trends and current issues. So we're scanning these four forces. We have resources. Then we have technology. The third force field that we scan for change is demographics. In every group, we are looking to see who's in the group and how do we retain our strength. And so very often it's determined by what's the healthy distribution of age, of procreation. How do we continue to add more to our group? What is the distribution of skill and labor so that we grow stronger in that way? So people, and we can do this at an organizational level. What are our resources? What are our tools and capabilities? And what kind of talent do we have?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the
fourth force field or force is that of governance. So governance is when a group comes together, we make decisions about how we're going to cooperate. And very often those decisions are manifest in rules of law and rules of the market. And more importantly, we create our governance usually through a worldview. What do we really believe people need to work together well? And, depending on that worldview, we're going to create different economic systems and different governmental systems. But all we have to do is look at the unit of a family. And, we hear people say, well, in this house, we do it this way. Right. Or our view of parenting is, this is what we feel education should be and what our role in education. We all have a worldview that shapes the governance, which in many ways shapes the culture as well.
Absolutely. And I'm a real fan of either some, spiral dynamics or Frederick Laloux's work in reinventing organizations, when we brought that in and showed the worldviews of different types of societies, and then how we're living. We were living in a time where we've got several different worldviews going on. And this was, I think this came out, it's still very relevant. And I think his book came out around 2013 or around there. But we're talking about, that we've got, and we change and we transcend, and we take some things with us and we leave some things behind. And I think what we're talking about now is that all four of these forces, from a societal perspective, from an organizational perspective, from an individual perspective, are in shift. And tell me if are we also saying that we're in a disorder or an expiration and emergence place and that this is the literacy that we need to follow. Is that what we're saying right now?
Almost. Yeah, there are elements of that. So what I like to describe is that on the surface, kind of, if we look on the surface of where we live, we will see trends and issues. If we look below the surface at these four forces, almost like they're tectonic plates, we
Yeah.
see the roots of these trends and how life is changing in each of these force fields.
Hmm.
So they're structural. They don't change, but they have different dynamics within them. So, and each one of them is speeding up in such a way that we can see that all of our current issues right now that are kind of combustible on the surface, if we look below, we can see, yeah, this is what's happening in resources. This is what's happening in technology, demographics. For instance, I talked about the mobility, which has put pressure on immigration. And now we have a reactive, right? These are the things where we don't know through our governance models how to maintain that kind of roiling action, each one of these, the first three, roiling action and combustion in resources, right?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
energy regime are we going to choose, and how are we going to engage or not engage with climate change? In technology, we have AI, which is now a completely new mode of production and distribution that shifts economies, unseats industries, has global competition that we don't even know how to contain through governance models. Right? Demographics, again, we have an imbalance of older people and younger people around the world. And so we can see all of our labor issues. We can see all of the immigration issues, again, roiling at the top. And what we are really seeing now in this power cycle that changes every 80 to 100 years, which happens at the governance level, is that the system, the container that we had over the last 80 years since World War II, that of international rules and law and all the agreements and defending the free world and all of that, first of all, they can't quite keep up with what's happening here. Mm-hmm. They were formed in a different era. And so we are breaking the bonds of governance all over the place right now. And we're shifting worldviews around what government should be. And that is, again, the Big Bang kind of energies of polarization and combustion. And it's all happening. So,
and we're seeing it. We're seeing people more divided than ever, confused. We're seeing the fear, and it's natural, and it's also followable. And I think we want to find a harmony and balance in that for people, right? Of yeah, we can't figure this all out, but there's a way through this.
Yes, we can. So the four forces are very, very helpful in making sense of what we're seeing on the surface. Mm-hmm. And when we make sense of things, we feel a lot better.
A little more certainty. Yeah.
Well, it's not certainty. It's sense making. And that's not the same thing. It really is. This makes sense to me. And I now have, as in Foresight, what we do, one of our key activities is we scan. So I can scan against these four forces to not only make sense of where we are now and to follow these cycles, but also see the potentials for where things may be headed. So let
me ask you a question. When you said we can make sense, we can follow, and then we can kind of see the potential, is that, that's the change literacy that we're talking about. And how can people do that? How can we see that?
Right. So what I'm suggesting, that kind of the components of change literacy, one is that things are cyclical. We are in different cycles in our own lives, as we may be in our relationships or our, organizations or our society. And that there are nested cycles. But if we can see where things are expiring and where they're emerging, that's the kind of the initial place.
Okay.
Now, when we want to make sense of the kind of change that we can be strategic around and lead, we look to the four forces that shape society, always have and always will. So even as our form of governance and the power shift around the world changes as it does in a cyclical fashion every 80 to 100 years, and we're right on time, it will reinvent its new order from those same four forces.
Mm-hmm.
So we can get rooted. It's about being rooted and finding some way, again, to make sense and read the motive forces of change as they are emerging.
Yes.
It is a way to read complexity, because emergence is actually a property of complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Complex systems that are, bouncing off each other and creating new possibilities through those energetic dynamics. And when we look below the surface, we can see their early signals of change. We can see how across the four force fields, how might they combine? Where are we headed in the next, at this point, 6 months, much less 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. But what does our purpose tell us where we're headed?
Mm-hmm.
And how are we going to steer it through the changes that are emerging through these four force fields?
So let me summarize this. Is we now see that we're in many things are expiring, and and it becomes very complex when things are expiring, and that's where we get emergence from. Just like that's where we flowers finally bloom because of that pressure, and then we make sense of it. That's the second part, and then we make sense of it. And we can be more strategic because of these four forces, which are resources, technology, demographics, and governance, that they don't change. Those four forces, how they play together, changes. And so and we start to follow that. How do we follow that? What do we look for as leaders and humans going through this right now?
Yeah. So the four forces, again, we're talking about the universals and the things that we can hold on to. And we're not only in a moment of expiration, we are always seeing some things expiring and some things emerging. So one of my phrases is, you want to make sure that when you see a trend moving one way, because energy moves in both directions, make sure that you're looking both directions before you cross the street.
I love that. So look forward,
Right?
look back, or look right, look left.
That's right.
Yeah.
So just as some things are expiring, other things are emerging. And what we're trying to practice is a discernment across the force fields. What is expiring and what is emerging? Across our organization, what is expiring and what is emerging in markets and so forth. So that's a lens that we're always looking to analyze where they are.
Yeah.
Now, when we are looking at strategy, we are wanting to ask ourselves, how are people's lives going to be in 1 or 2 or 5 years, let's say?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the way we create a scenario for that picture of how will they be living? What will work be like? Will there be work? How is automation going to affect it? Like all those things that we're wanting to sort out. We look across, we scan the four force fields to find out what's emerging there and what's falling away. And how does it intersect with our purpose and where we're headed, such that we can see our potential in these future potentials and go, aha, we have work to do. This is a place where we can point our direction. Doesn't mean it's going to be a guarantee, but we've done enough grounded research across this four forces scan that we can be directionally right, and then be engaging with the process of continuous reinvention. As the world is churning, so are we adapting and responding in real time by setting our course, but at the same time experimenting. In this direction, we're seeing this emerge. Let's try this for a little while. It's all turning and churning fast. We have to too.
Right. Yeah.
So the more that we can kind of follow expiration and emergence and reference the four forces, the more capable and solid we can be in casting that path. Yeah.
I love this because I just had a colleague and client of mine that ask, how do we now do strategy when we know things are always going to change? And part of now I have, more to share of center this podcast. But the other thing is that I was like, part of the reason that I combine deep leadership development and relational skills with a more adaptive approach to strategy is because that is one place that you anchor on in those places because of the constant adaptation because we're experimenting, and we don't just set things and a 5-year strategy anymore and just follow it. We have to sense and respond. What you are beautifully adding to this equation is we need to look at those 4 force fields in along with our purpose. And it goes at different levels. We have to always be looking at our personal purpose and where our life is. If we're leaders in organizations, okay, what's the purpose of this organization? And what are the 4 forces and how am I going to lead? And I also have to pay attention to what's going on beyond my organization in the world around me, in my country and in the world.
And
Yeah.
these cycles and forces will help you, again, make sense of that. And, I've been a business futurist for 25 years. And so I feel like in many ways, I've been saying the same things for so long. And it's only now when things hit, people go, oh,
this is what she said. This is what she meant.
Right. That the warning of turbulence has come due. And it hit, of course, initially in the pandemic when, I was getting calls from people asking, can you tell us when this will be over? Or what will the future of work be? Or kind of where is it all going to settle out? And I said, I really can't.
Right.
Because this is the condition of our world for a long time. So in some ways, some of the lessons from the pandemic are really what we should be operationalizing long term. And what I mean by that is that, the very first thing that we do in a crisis, because this is kind of continual crisis. It's not the most lovely word, but in many ways, what we do in crisis is, first we triage, how are our people? How are our assets?
Mm-hmm.
And we're securing those things first all the time. But in the work that I was during that time, and what I'm training groups and leadership teams to do now too, is to be in a form of continuous reinvention. And it's a different way to work. And what that includes is kind of SWAT teams who follow you can get this basic literacy in the 4 forces and people speak by release. You can also have people who are watching, like it's there. They have listening posts across these force fields so that when you're coming back, whether it's once a month or every quarter, you're reporting out on it. And you have organized your teams to do that. So you're updating continuously.
And we're organizing differently now too.
Organizing different because we are mapping differently. We are measuring differently. It's and so, these are short-term bursts to meet short-term cycles that are anchored to a long-term view.
Right. So there's something really important you said a lot of really important things, but the lessons from the pandemic, I've heard 2 schools of thought, and I'm in one of them. One school of thought is like, this was over, we go back to where we were. But actually, the other school of thought is this was a clue as to where we're going. And those key things we learned, there's no going back from those. We continue forward with those. I'm curious from the 4 forces and from what you're talking about, your perspective on that.
Yeah, I don't think we get to make the choice. It's not as if it's a philosophy. There are realities that are continuing to cause our world and our work world to be very different. And so as almost every organization is dealing with right now, for instance, is they're trying to sort out, how do we embrace AI? And that's one of the most urgent needs of all. And so it does shift. Once again, what technology does is it shifts production and distribution. And that includes production and distribution of knowledge, right? And so how we do what we do is different. So I think that's where I would make a fundamental a shift in the way of viewing, whether we go back or go forward. It's not a choice. This is not philosophical. This is just real, and what we choose, of course, is to go to what we know, because we can manage from there if only the world would comply.
Mm-hmm.
But there is no compliance right now. Yeah. Our job is to build this anticipatory intelligence, right? The other AI, while being skilled and using the tools as well, and shift our method of management. We have to.
Yes. And I want to link.
And it's not about mindsets. I mean, this is one of my arguments. It's not just about mindsets. It's a complete shift in the way of managing things.
Right. Right. And mindset is one part of that. I want to make a tie to some of when I transition deep work with leaders into the systems work. So part of the work of moving from a reactive to creative leader, or what we sometimes call conscious leadership, is starting to get much more comfortable with the shadow, the unconscious of ourselves and of our organization, and seeing that and how it plays against our goals, and then experimenting forward and creating these safe to fail experiments. And so when I ask an individual leader to do this, I'm not just asking them to do that for their mindset change. I'm asking them to do that because then they take that to the team and the organizational level, because they need to experiment with these, which I do not use, but I will now, the 4 forces, right? Because it's followable, not figureoutable. And you have to have the capacity as a leader to take your organization in that direction.
There you go. This is what I think is absolutely the critical missing piece, is that it can't be through intention alone, right? It has to be, we have to know what to follow and how to follow. So there are some handholds, and nature shows us the principles very, very well. And, and I can speak from experience how well it works when it is applied in this way. So that in the beautiful work that you're doing, as people come into the willingness and the capacity to hold experiments better, they now have a strategic guardrail for what those experiments should be, and what they're watching and what they're responding to. Again, a little bit of ahead of time, the anticipatory intelligence. So for me, it's the missing piece. And it is also beautifully linked with the deep work.
So let's link that better for people, because I think that is missing right now. Is our systems are changing. We are in we are in disorder. We can get through this, and we also have to change. They are linked. It is not a nice to have to change, to do this deep work as an individual leader for your system. Can you help me link that with your words?
Yeah, so I'm just speaking about this as change literacy. It's been my long-term mission that, learning to read change is not that hard. A little bit of training and you can do it at scale. And I'm on a mission. Everybody should. When I talk about what leaders need is a change fluency. And a fluency means that these are hardwired traits, and that we get trained in the skill and reading of reinvention itself, right? These cycles. When we really pattern our own behavior and watching how life is turning, it's different. So, for me, in my Lead Like a Futurist program, leading self is what's first. And we do the core fluency of reinvention, because that's what we have to do at a larger scale as well. But it has to be embodied.
Right.
We do purpose next. Purpose, as I've shared with you my view with that, again, kind of unchangeable. You have to locate it in yourself to be able to steer it for your team.
Yes.
We then go to leading strategy, where the fluencies are foresight, where we're talking about what strategy is. And I have the algebra of strategy around what doesn't change. And that includes those 4 forces don't change, even though their expression does, but it gives us a way to actually analyze where things may be headed and how we're going to engage with it. and innovation. So that's leading strategy. The two fluencies on leading culture are really understanding how belonging works. And then the final fluency is wisdom. So each of these fluencies is kind of like a ladder rung into the development of wisdom, which rests itself on the humility that I cannot know everything and that I'm always leaning in and learning more. On the discernment between, I speak about it as the Futurist serenity prayer, knowing the difference between what changes and what doesn't in order to figure out what's next.
Yeah.
And also that when we really anchor to having that futurist view where we can see what's going on and what really matters and that can kind of hinge back into action, we are guided by something that is naturally and organically ethical because we can actually see and read the systems of change. It makes a difference. And so when we then begin to shift that, it shifts who we are and how we relate to change within our own lives, how we relate to others as they're going through change, what our organizational life, how it needs to be held. We're building a great capacity. We are becoming more spacious as we do this. And that we are doing what I hope, I think I mentioned this in our last conversation. The core aspect of wisdom is to meet reality just as it is.
Right.
And that requires being able to read it.
Absolutely.
And then hold the space for all of what it includes, including what we don't like and what we're fearful of. But in reading it and moving with it from this higher perspective, we can find direction.
Yes.
And that is our path of purpose. That is what we're here to do. And we're going to make sure that all of our assets, all of our people, I said that when we triage, what do we protect? Our people and our assets, that we can marshal those towards this path because we have a view and we know how to get that view. It's really beautiful.
Yeah. And I want to add, I love how beautifully you've explained this and the importance of why people will ask me, when I have a thing called human touch strategy, and to do it, the full part of it is we do similar to lead like a futurist, right? We do the deep work of leaders first. And then we go into strategy because the type of strategy we're putting together now is an adaptable strategy. It's a changing strategy. And we need to build that capacity. And, I don't always talk people into that. Right. And especially when and now it's actually more important maybe than it was even 2 years ago of, well, why would wait, that's leadership development and this is strategy. And those two don't go together. And absolutely, yes, they do, because we need strategy to be done very differently. And therefore, the point we're making is the capacity of those leading it has got to shift, because then we can follow the four forces of change. And there's more of us following it, because it's not one leader at the top that can hold all of this.
No, and an age in which, for the first time in human history, we have intelligence that lives outside of a single skull. And it is, we are going to be seeing new models and new capabilities coming at us, just within the year 2025 and by the end of 2 years that are going to be, again, shifting the game entirely. Yeah. So when we are flooded with this much intelligence that we are whiplash by, we need to steady ourselves with the human capacity of wisdom.
Yeah.
What matters? How do we know? What's our perspective? What's our purpose? How do we care? It's really gets down to just the fundamentals over and over and over again, and it's all trainable.
Yeah. So what we're saying here is there is a lot of, yes, we are acknowledging there is a lot of change. We are in a different cycle than many of us have seen in our lifetime. And And yes, there is a lot of change coming at us, and there is a way through this. And it's really important that we balance the capacity within ourselves and of those as leaders and as humans and of teams with the new capacity of the four forces that are shifting right now, and follow those. And we can't separate those two. They have to move together. And that's primarily what we want to say today. We could talk for 2 days about this, but what we want is leaders and people and organizations. There is a way through this. There is a way through uncertainty, but we have to make some changes within ourselves and how we do things to move through this in a more fluid, flourishing way.
Fluid and flourishing. I like it. Yeah. And to recognize that part of the capacity we're developing to when we follow what's expiring and what's emerging is that we are also building our capacity for loss.
Yeah.
Right. This is change always includes great loss. And this is what we have to hold to and allow it to mature us, because it is our reality at the same time that there are always new things emerging, and that we want to participate in order to shape what comes next.
Yeah. So Cecily, thank you so much for us being able to get together as soon as we did to be able to get this second episode out, because I think this conversation is incredibly important. And the more leaders and humans and organizations that can really latch on to this, I'm not going to say it's easier, but we'll get through this in a much smoother way. Yeah. Yeah. So
Saner way is my hope.
Saner way. I love that.
Sanity and sobriety. And yeah. I want to thank you, Renelle, for hosting conversations such as this that matters. We are all in this together. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cecily. For more information, visit insight-cc.com or email us at info@insight-cc.com. We look forward to hearing from you.